I know they're after the queen. I put her in my pocket because I had her over here, and you can see they were all over, and so I figured that would keep her safe for a while. But I suspect if I keep them there much longer, it'll be all over me. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. A couple of things just about splitting hives before we actually get into anything. There's lots of different ways you can do it. We're on a lake. Lots of different ways you can do it. That swarm's back though. You want to try and catch that, James? It came back. So there's lots of different ways you can go about making a split. I'm not a big fan, like I mentioned this morning, of the walkaway splits, simply because the issue of emergency queen cells, right? If I were to take a box of brood and just simply set it off to the side and let them raise out a queen, I'm basically selecting for an emergency queen. And studies show that generally speaking, those emergency queens are inferior in nature to ones that are either swarms from swarm cells or supersedure, which is a more planned event. And if I take a box of brood and just simply set it off to the side, that's what I'm doing. I'm creating that situation where they're going to just raise out any queen they can, which is going to be an emergency queen, and so I'm going to possibly end up with an issue after the fact because of those emergency queens. So when I make a split, I always like to install a queen, whether it be I'm taking it from a nuke, or whether in this case I'm taking it from, ooh, they're getting more numerous, or if I'm installing a queen like this one. And so because of that, I also won't split the hive until I have a queen on hand. If I were to split this hive now, and I didn't have my queen, and my queen maybe was supposed to be in on Monday, and then I make my split today and go back Monday to pop my queen in, they will have already started to raise out queen cells. And so the chance of them accepting that queen is less than if I install that queen right away. So I always make my split when I have a queen in hand, as I do today. So there's a couple of different ways to do them, as I mentioned. The biggest challenge is, where's the queen, right? You want to know which part, either the child or the parent, has the queen, so that you don't accidentally install your new queen in with the mother queen. So there's a lot of ways you can do that besides simply just going through frame by frame trying to find her. Now I will tell you that we had an eagle-eye woman here in the first session, and she's like, there she is. It made my life a whole lot easier. So if anybody can do that for me this time, I'd really appreciate it. But what you can do is, I've got a stack. This is the one we're going to split. We split that one in the first session, but this is the one we're going to split. Let's say, this is a honey super up here, and these two have brood, and this one has brood, and I want to make a good, strong split. What I can do is come here with the queen excluder, and I can slip that queen excluder in between these and wait 5 days. Now this takes a little more careful planning because I've got to time my queen, I've got to time this with my schedule, but I'm going to slip that queen excluder in there, and then I'm going to come back in 5 days, because an egg is an egg for 3 days, no more, and then it hatches. So when I come back in 5 days and I'm going through this hive, if I see eggs in these boxes, I know my queen's above the queen excluder. If I see eggs below the queen excluder, of course she's downstairs. And now I know where my queen is without even having to lay eyes on her. And so at that point, I can split these and know where to install my new queen. Okay, so that's a very easy way. It does take some time, some planning, but it's a very easy way to make a split without the labor and time of trying to find your queen. Now, if you don't have that kind of time where you can come back 5 days later, or you've got your queen today and you want to split this hive today, the other thing you can do is you could have an empty box, an empty super here. You can go into these, shake all the bees off into the hive, take the frame of brood, put it in that empty box, Do that for all these two these two brood chambers here. Shake all the bees off, and then put your queen excluder on, and then put those boxes back on top. Wait 15, 30 minutes, an hour maybe. What will happen is, first off, you've shaken all the bees off, so you know your queen is not above the queen excluder, because you've shaken all those bees down into the bottom portion, and you've got your queen excluder there. And during this 15-minute, half-hour, hour time frame, bees are very keen on tending brood. They do not like to neglect it. So what will happen is all the nurse bees will move up through that queen excluder to recluster onto the frames of brood. And now, once there's sufficient nurse bees up here, again, I can split that just the way I was going to before. I know my queen is downstairs. I know my queen is not up here, that this is where I'm going to put my queen. Now the other thing is, they're liking her. Here's a little tip. If you're ever going to pick up a queen from someone and they've got a bunch of them out on the table, and you see one that's just covered up with bees like this, take that one. Because that's the one with the strong pheromone and is attracting all those bees. And so if you see one over here that doesn't have any bees on it, and this one over here that's got a lot of bees, take the one that's got a lot of bees. There's good strong pheromone production. The other question that we often get is, how strong do you make the split? And that varies, right? In this case, over here, in the first session, I just put it into a 5-frame medium. There's lots of frames of brood in there. I don't need to make it particularly strong. The weather is such that I don't need a lot of bees to maintain the environment, the temperature of the brood. If it were back in, April or March, and maybe it's going to be down in the 40s or 30s, I might want to make it stronger so there's more bees in there to tend the brood, to keep it warm. So things like that may play a role. But what you can do, no matter how strong you make a split, no matter what you're doing, there will be some drift back from the child to the parent. So in this case over here, I will lose some bees out of that nuke because I have some foragers. They'll go out and forage, and they're going to come back to the parent hive. So if you want to have kind of a relatively equal strength situation, either make sure the child has more bees, knowing that some will return back, or what you can do is put the child where the parent is and move the parent to a different location. And all your foragers will come back to that child and boost its population. And the other question we get to is, how far away do you need to move your split? Well, the reality is this one's sitting right here, and that's fine. Yes, I will lose the foragers back to the parent location, but the bees that are on that brood, on those frames of brood, those are house bees. They have no idea where they are. They're down at the beach for all they know. And so they are perfectly fine, hunkered down to stay on those frames, and they will. And so I will lose some back, but the rest will stay right there and go on their orientation flights and learn that this nuke box is their hive, not the parent hive. Now that said, that nuke box is going to get moved out of here tonight, and so it'll be in a different location, and I won't lose all those foragers, some, of course, right now. But that helps with how far away. You really don't have to move it far at all. Right next to it is fine. Okay? So that's just sort of a quick overview of how to go about doing some splits, some things to think about. What I'm going to do with this one, I've got a deep nuke box, so I've got to take frames from down here. And so I've got to go all the way down to the bottom. And in this case, because of the situation, I'm gonna try and find my queen. If I can't, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take these boxes up here, and I'm gonna take these frames and I'm gonna shake all the bees off of them into these boxes, and I'll put my queen excluder on there again, like I was talking about, and let nurse bees recluster onto the brood, and then I'll take those frames and move them over. But I'm hoping someone here has that eagle eye as we're going through to find that queen. And also, based on what I saw this morning, there's a lot of folks that are new to this, so we'll talk about some things unrelated to splits as we're going through. You can see all the nectar on the lid over here. One of the things we talked about was, you know, how do you know whether you should harvest the frame of honey or not if it's uncapped? And we showed the flick test, and that's the result to the flick test, so I might show that again. And you can see that honey because it came flying out of the frames when I flicked it, which if you've never seen that, I'll show it to you. That clearly is not honey ready to be harvested. Way too much moisture. It will end up fermenting in your buckets for sure, and maybe even creating little bombs in your jars if you're using jars, because it'll ferment and build up enough pressure to explode. So that was some really high moisture.
Will it do the
nectar.
same thing with plastic jars?
It'll expand them, sure. Yeah. So the other thing, anybody not ever have bees walk on them? Anybody always not? So this is these bees here, as you can see, they're more interested in the queen than they are in me. They're walking all over me. It tickles like mad because they're vibrating, they're fanning to spread her pheromone. But it's a great way to get accustomed to having bees walk on you because they're more interested in the queen than they are me if you're interested in trying that. If not, that's fine too. I always tell people, do what you need to do to feel comfortable around the bees. If you don't feel comfortable with bees walking on you, it's not going to be pleasant for anyone. So don't try it. Yeah.
One of our guys in the association I'm with said if you're new, he just took his hand, sprayed sugar water on it, and let it lay there. They came and cleaned his hand off.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that was cool. It was an idea.
The other thing you can do is, you know, drones can't sting, and so having drones are a good time too. That's a drone. Now, just don't pinch one, and you'll be fine. There you go. So what I'm going to do is I'll get started. It's going to tickle. You all right?
I'm good.
Okay. So I'm going to get started. And we also, we did see the queen in that one, the parent hive over there. So we were able to mark her, which was nice. Maybe we'll have that opportunity here as well.
That's fairly easy.
It's fairly easy, especially with a tube like this, so you don't actually have to touch the queen at all. So I'm going to get into this one. For those of you that are new, one of the things you want to get this going again. Just about went out on me after the last session. You want to put some smoke into the entrance. I don't have much smoke going, but we'll get some here in a second.
I see it advertised in your book about the liquid smoke.
Liquid smoke's popular in the urban environments because it the plume of smoke from a smoker draws attention.
Okay.
And from your neighbors, and so in urban environments you don't necessarily want to be drawing the attention of your neighbors.
Okay.
So it's quite popular in those types of markets. So I'll also give the same disclosure to y'all that I gave to the first group, which is to be quite honest, I have not been in these hives in several weeks. Daniel's been going through them, so I'm going in blind. We're all going in blind together. I don't know what we're going to see, but he assures me there's enough going on in here that we can split them. So he did put on a super, and I'll just pull this brand new equipment, brand new frames and foundation. They're just barely starting on this now. So we're trying to get some new comb drawn out. Not much happening in here. So we'll just take this one and set it aside.
How long does it take him to draw out the comb? Like, for example, that box, how long would you expect?
It depends entirely on the strength of the hive as well as the flow, the nectar flow. If there's no nectar coming in, they have no desire to produce comb because they only produce comb when they need to store something. And so if they don't have anything to store, I'm going to need to light this after the last session. So if they don't need to store anything, they're not going to produce the wax. It takes about 7 to 8 pounds of honey to produce a pound of wax. So that's why we say to people, don't expect anything your first year.
Because they're spending it all building.
Because they're building the infrastructure, yeah. Obviously that's way too hot a smoker, but as soon as I put this on, those flames will go out, and I can check it on my wrist. If it stays a little too hot, we can put some green grass on it. That helps cool it down. There we go. That's nice. Okay. So in here, when we start to work, the question is, where do we start? And the answer is whichever frame is easiest to get out, and we like to start on the outside edge. So this one looks to be the easiest.
These are 8 frames, right?
And these are 8 frames with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames in it. So, and the reason why we like to put 7 frames is if you went to the extracting class, anybody go to the extracting class? It's really easy when the honey extends out beyond the top bar like this, where it's a fat frame, to uncap those cells. So by putting in the fewer number of frames, we're more apt to get the frames drawn out like that. So this is making me hungry. If my kids were here, they'd be shoving their finger in it. Because nothing's better than honey fresh from the hive, they tell me. Now, so this is what I'm going to do here. I'll demonstrate the flick test. Get the bees off. So you can see all these, this frame is uncapped on this side, right? But there's obviously nectar in there. And this frame side is partially capped. So how do we know if it's ripe enough to harvest? Well, the best way, the surest way, is to actually test it with a refractometer. Another crude test is taking it, this is the flick test, this is a very technical, don't try this at home. You hold it firmly like this, and all you do is just sort of take it and flick it. All that nectar should not have come out if this frame were properly cured. You may see a couple of drops, but now you can see all this nectar on here that just came flying out. I would not harvest this frame unless maybe everything else in there was capped. Then, on average, the moisture might be 16%. Maybe here, well, with it that runny, it's probably up in the mid-20s. So it might average out to 18.6 or less, but that's quite a bit coming out. So that's the flick test. It's a very crude test to know whether your honey is cured or not, or guess, I should say, whether your honey is cured or not. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to cheat a little bit because I failed to remember to bring an empty box up. But I want to shake all these bees off. And so I'm going to take all these frames out for right now, and I'm going to use this as my empty box since this is all just brand new comb. I'm just going to set these over here for now.
Now, will those bees on there find their way back?
Notice I put the box on the inner cover, so when I put the hive back together, the vast majority of them will end up sort of being put back in the hive.
I meant the ones you're putting over there.
Yeah, they'll probably just hunker down right there on those frames, and ultimately they'll end up back in the hive. So what I'm going to do now that I've shaken this frame off, is take this one and move it over. And I'm going to do that with every single frame going through this hive, and shake those bees off, and that way I know my queen is not in any of these boxes. Now, before I do that too, I don't want to injure my queen, so I will do a quick inspection just to make sure I don't see her. And of course, if I do, that makes things really easy for this process. I don't like these nail-in frame spacers. I'm not a big fan of those. So we'll just take a quick gander here. Lots of nectar.
This is just burr comb in here?
That's just a little bit of burr comb, yep. Because they have to create little ladders so that they can get from one story to the next, and then also from one frame to the next within. So this is mostly nectar. It's unlikely that I would see my queen on this frame just because
What is
those are 2 drone cells.
Okay.
Yep. So those are a couple drone cells. I'll see if I can't find a better example of those once we get down in deeper. So what I'm going to do is just shake them off, take a quick look, make sure I don't see her. Whoop. Move that frame over, and now go into the next one.
You ever get to a point you use a full bee suit anymore?
Not usually. Like I said, I'm a Yankee, so Heat and I don't get along very well. So now this is, we had a lot of questions the last session about this right here. So this is a queen cup, as is right here. It's very, very common to see queen cups in your hive. It's when you see queen, something in those cups that we consider it a queen cell and have reason for concern. Why are they building them? Where are they building them? What's going on and what should I do with them? And in this case, they're empty, so I'm not terribly concerned about it.
And this down here on the big other side.
That's just so again, bees, they want to have about 10% drone,
Okay.
and so these are drone cells that they're building out right here.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm trying to have you explain so when I go home to my hive,
Sure.
you know. what
And
I'm
actually
seeing.
here you can see some other, these are all drone cells. Notice how much bigger they are relative to these up here,
Okay.
right? So
Oh,
these are all
yeah.
drone, because again, you know, when you look at, so here's a drone, right? Look at how much bigger he is relative to the workers. So he needs a bigger cell to mature in relative to the workers. So if you put him right down next to a worker bee, notice how much larger.
Oh yeah.
Bigger girth, longer, bigger girth, deeper cell for those drones to mature in.
Never had a problem finding the drones from the workers. It's the queens.
Yeah. Shake them off, do a quick look.
Holy cow, look at all those bees.
Yeah, it's nice, huh?
You said you only have one hive.
Uh-huh.
And how long you had it?
About 3 months.
So these are all nectar. These frames have all nectar in them. So again, it's unlikely that I'm going to find my queen on one of these frames because, right, if it's all nectar, there's nowhere for her to lay. So why should she be there? There's really no reason for it. Now, it's still worth checking though, because you just never know. They do the craziest things sometimes.
Do you check your queen cup for larvae when you notice if they're the queen cup?
I do.
Just check
Yep.
kind of a visual.
Absolutely. Because again, the presence of a queen cup doesn't concern me. It's when there's something in that cup that I have reason for further inspection.
And then would you knock it off or would you wait to see what the rest of the hive was?
You mean, would I knock it off if I saw something in it?
Yeah.
So that's a great question. My rule of thumb, that's a drone. Yep.
The different color head.
Well, they've got the drones have
Well-
eyes that occupy their head. Queens will have eyes similar to a worker.
Okay, I didn't.
Because
I
both-
didn't mean the head, but like a different color.
Well, color can be deceiving
Yeah,
too because
yeah.
there's genetic variation. But the abdomen, notice the tips of the wings go to the end of the abdomen, whereas the tips of the wings on a queen will only go about halfway down her abdomen. So I will not do anything with a queen cell unless I see eggs inside that hive. And then depending on the situation, what I want to do, I may just say, go forth and be merry. And do whatever it is you want to do with that queen cell. Or I may take those queen cells and make a split, something along those lines. So so we've got a frame of brood. So it's possible that she could be on this one. There's some open cells. It's possible she could be up in this box. So I want to be a little bit more careful. And this is a typical not quite so much pollen as I would expect, but this is a pretty typical frame with honey up in the corners, that rainbow pattern of brood, and down here, these are open cells because the queen will typically start in the middle, work her way out. So these, when she starts, will be the oldest. They'll emerge out, so they'll create the open areas, but then these will become caps. She'll come back and fill up with eggs. So you end sort of up with this rippling effect and constant cycle of open with closed cells as she goes through that process. So again, this is just one frame. I'm not expecting her to be up here, but it's certainly a possibility. And you know, the problem with this particular technique of shaking the bees off is that you can see we're concentrating all these bees down into a smaller and smaller space. So it's going to become a little bit more challenging for us, which is why one nice thing is to come here, you know, 5 days in advance and throw that queen excluder in, and then come back and say, okay, where are the eggs? And at that point, it's pretty easy. But doing it this way, we're making life difficult for ourselves.
Now, when you do that, when you put the queen excluder in, you put it in between the first and second box, and you just take.
So if I were going to split these two boxes off, I'd put it in between here.
And to do that, you just take the entire the box off with the frames inside, with the bees in it, and move it to the
That's
side.
right. Yep. So I am gonna cheat just a little bit here.
Is that the only time you'll use the queen excluder? I mean, some people use it to separate the super.
I use them whenever I've got honey supers on. I like to keep my brood separate from my honey. So I'm gonna cheat, and what I'm gonna do, so I don't keep. Yeah, I take them off. You want to take, if you're leaving a honey super on for winter, you want to take them off at that point, because you want your queen to be able to get up into that, up into those stores. I just want to take a quick look here on the sides to make sure I don't see her moseying around. That can happen sometimes too.
You won't see her twice in weeks. It's like once you see her, you can't forget. You know.
So I'm gonna cheat, since I'm ultimately gonna use this box to make my split. I'm gonna go right down in there. Set that right there. And then I'm gonna take this one.
So are these mostly Italians?
This one started from a nuke, so it's going to be a mix of Italian, Carniolan, Russian. Oh. See what I'm doing here? I'm cheating. I'm all about the cheating.
Let's shake the deep one into the others.
And that's, let's see, this is my... Slide in a little bit so I don't do too much damage to them. I'm going to just take one of these, since I only have 7 frames in this box, and I'm going to use it now in the brood. Now, now
they're upset.
they're a little upset. I'm still going to do a quick look for my queen. And I also want to make sure I've got a good couple of frames in here to steal. So, and I'm just gonna leave these like fanned out behind. So there's a frame. This actually, so this is a pretty new frame. We'll take a minute to talk about this one. So here's cap brood, here's pollen, and in between, where'd they go? Up in here are eggs. Let me just take a quick look, make sure my queen's not on here. And then we can pass this one. We can pass this one around.
So talking about that just real quick. I think earlier you said y'all had switched to a plastic foundation. Big kit for the main kit.
That's right.
Do you, because of
So we can pass this one around. You can look at the eggs up in this area.
pesticide concern? I understood that.
Yep.
So do you have any recommendations on how to prep that plastic frame so the bees will
Get in and out here.
So,
more quickly? I mean, obviously if they don't have something else to go to.
so there's a couple of things depending on your level of effort that you want to go to. You can spray it down with sugar water, and the bees will be interested in licking that sugar water up off the frame, and as they do that, they will begin to start working it and drawing wax. That's one way. The other way is you can actually take some of your cappings, and cappings wax is your cleanest, freshest wax. So if you're doing candles or soap making or any sort of lip balm projects, you want to use your cappings wax because that's the cleanest stuff. And so you can take some of that cappings wax and you can melt it down and take a foam brush and just brush it on. You want it just warm enough that it's melted, so when you brush it across the surface of the frame, it actually collects at the top of the ridge, and then they'll start to chew that and thin it out to create the comb. So we definitely have enough brood here that we're going to be able to split, which is great.
Sunglasses, I can't. And are there preferred times? No, that's uncapped. That's an uncapped larva. You would do splits versus not do splits. Yep.
When you say times to do them, like time of day versus time of year, so
Yeah.
the
We
timing
have
of a
the
split
natural wax foundation.
largely
Yeah, I
depends
have a hard time
on the
seeing
strength
on the white foundation.
of the colony. Obviously, we're not going to be interested in splitting. That's a queen cup. There's nothing in there. We're not going to be interested in splitting a colony in March because typically it's too weak after coming through winter. So the strength of the parent is important to consider, and then the time needed for your child to develop and survive winter. So if you're trying to make a split and create a brand new colony that you want to overwinter, you're going to have to do it early enough in the season, like now, and feed it and care for it so that it can become strong enough. It can become strong enough to overwinter. If it's a nuke, you can do it a little bit later because those nukes don't necessarily have to be quite as strong as a full-size colony to overwinter. So you can do it maybe in August.
Would you ever use two queen excluders to try to take them through? Would you like take them all out into a box through the excluder, or two big oven excluders?
So I have
Like through this rubber?
I've never really had good luck trying to get bees to drive them down through an excluder. So yeah, we're just gonna. I don't want her going up my sleeve. And of course, you know, we're not going to find her. She's going to be in one of those boxes that we just threw right on there. That's just Murphy's Law. So again, I'm not really doing a very thorough scan to try and find her on here. I'm just doing a quick scan. If I happen to see her, great. But otherwise, I'm just shaking them off.
Now, in this that you're shaking off, she would, if she were dropping off, would go right. She wouldn't be one of these flying around.
That's right.
How about box and
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. Now, the thing with cap queen cells, I never take them out of the colony in which I find them, or I never cut them out for any reason unless I see eggs inside that colony or I see that queen. Because the last thing I want to do is create what we call a hopelessly queenless colony. And so if I take all those queen cells, and they don't have an egg to raise out a new queen cell, then I could create a potential situation for myself.
so would you leave maybe one frame with 1 or 2 cap queen cells in the parent colony and maybe move 1
If
or 2 with
if I didn't see eggs, I might do that. Yep. Okay. So I don't see her on any of these frames, and that's all right. But what I'm going to do now,
You seeing any eggs?
I did see some eggs on some of those. Yep, actually the frame that we passed around, right, that had some eggs on it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take these and put them in.
So you feel like this one's strong enough because of the amount of brood you saw, or the amount of bees, or the combination?
It's got to be about the brood. It's got to be about the brood. If you base it solely on the population of adult bees, if you base it solely on the number of adult bees, you could have a very strong colony in terms of adult bees, but if you've got no brood, that colony is not going to have adult bees after a while.
So you do that by the amount of frames with brood, or I mean, how many frames with brood? How do you judge that? Based
So-
on space or what?
So it's right. So in this case, these 2 boxes are full of brood. Plus, I've got brood on here. This colony can easily support being split
Okay, because you've got at least 2 full
because I've got at least 2 full
plus.
boxes. Yeah. Can someone just hand me that queen excluder? This
So is that the
excluder.
rule is there like a rule of thumb
Well, you can certainly, again, it depends on what your goals are, right? I can certainly just get those bees in there. I can certainly split a single-story hive, but I'm going to end up with 2 very weak colonies, right? And so, and maybe that's okay. Maybe something's going on with those colonies, that one single colony, and I want to requeen it, right? So I can split it in 2, pop 2 queens in. Now I've got 2 nukes. Maybe those are my nukes that I'm going to try and overwinter. Maybe those nukes I'm going to encourage to grow and foster them so that I can use them in grow them into full-size colonies.
When would you start that? When would you start a winter nuke?
So you can start it at any time, but if you like these right now, these like this nuke that I started over here, and this, and if I'm going to start this nuke here, to keep it small, I'm going to have to actively work at it because they're going to grow and fill this out in no time flat. And so I'm going to have to actively take comb, whether it be just drawn comb or comb that's full of honey or brood, and constantly be stealing it from that nuke to keep it small. Otherwise, it's ultimately just going to swarm. And so you've got to actively manage it to keep it in that state of infancy, so to speak. Okay, so I had a frame. Where'd that 2, 4, 6, 7? I have that frame back. Thank you.
You're missing something.
So now what'll happen is the bees don't like to neglect brood. So I'm gonna wait for these bees to come up. It may take a while. We might have to pull it off just so that we can go finish up the process before we conclude for the day here a little bit early. But I'm gonna wait for these bees to come up. Those nurse bees, those will be all house bees. They won't really know where they are. I can then take frames of brood and move them over into my nuke box Or if I wanted, if I had a bottom board and another cover, I could take this whole box right off and set it over here and do it that way. So again, there's just lots of different ways you could go about doing this. I'm going to sort of hasten the process here by getting these ladies in there.
So with this plastic frame again, like if you wanted to recycle it, you just take the top to and scrape it off.
Yeah, so what happens sometimes is because, especially in brood frames, the bees are polishing the inside with propolis, but also every time the larva starts and gets capped over, it spins a cocoon to go through the metamorphosis. So when you go to scrape it off, what happens is you often pull off all the wax and leave naked plastic. And so that's not very enticing. So it is best to go back then and apply some fresh wax to it. But that's one of the nice things about it, is you can scrape it down and reuse it time and time again. What I do is in the winter time, it's a great time to clean frames. So one, you can leave it out. Maybe they become infested with wax moth. Not a bad deal if you're trying to get rid of it, because then that makes it really easy to, I mean, it's almost like a sheet. You can peel it right off because all the wax moth webbing holds it together, and then you can just dip it in a very weak Clorox solution and then paint on new wax. Or if you don't get the wax moth, wait until it's cold, and you wait until it's 20 degrees outside, and all you got to do is take a frame and go pop, and all that wax shatters right off of it, because wax becomes very brittle in the cold, and so you can just basically clean those frames that way.
You don't worry about leaving the wax in, like scoot outside. I'm not really dying until the really long hours.
Yeah, so wax moth is the biggest thing, and there's no form of wax moth, adult, egg, or larva, that can survive temperatures of 32 degrees or less. So that's one of the nice things. Even the eggs cannot stand freezing. Now the problem is, a lot of people will take a box and they'll put it in their shed. And the outside temperature may be 20, but the shed provides enough of a cushion that it provides just enough buffer that the wax moth can survive in there all winter long. But if you store your equipment outside, you'll kill them.
Put them in the freezer is what I've heard.
You can freeze them as well. Oh, gosh, you're still holding that queen cage.
No,
Thank
I
you.
put it down for a while.
Okay, so you can see now there's still quite a few empty frames here, but the bees are coming up through. And if I let this sit for another, 15 or so minutes, we'll be out of time. But if I let this sit for another 15 or so minutes, those bees will have come up and covered up the frames of brood, and then I could transfer them over. I'm gonna hasten the process just a little bit for sake of wrapping everything up and getting through the installation and stuff. But if this were you, you'd want to show some patience, go relax, kick up the feet for a while, enjoy, and come back in about 15 or 20 minutes and they'll be covered up. But again, we're just going to sort of speed things up. I do not, at this point, I don't want to take this smoker and puff them with smoke because it's going to drive the bees down off these frames. So I don't want to do that. I want to keep my smoker out of the picture.
Is there any rule of thumb how many hives you can have on a certain amount of property?
There are some towns that have ordinances.
I don't have any ordinance.
So,
If you're out in the county, you're good.
yeah.
But
I suspect the number of hives that you may want to have will not be a number that would exceed capacity. Right? So how many hives are you thinking?
5, 10.
well, I have one hive and I'm on 4 1/4 acres.
Yeah. But the thing is, that's not enough land for those bees. But that's okay, because they fly. They don't respect your property lines, which your neighbors might not like very much, but they can't prove they're your bees. So they will travel up on average 2 miles. So you don't have enough land for them, but they go to where they need, where they've got the resources that they need.
Well, I'm rural, so.
Yeah, so no worries.
Good.
So I've got 12 at my house. When I was doing this on a quasi-commercial basis, I never wanted to have more than 40 in a yard, and my goal was 20 to 30 in a yard.
Okay.
I never really wanted many more than that, because then I felt like they were kind of competing with each other.
Okay.
Like
So-
we grow strawberries, and we have bees obviously for that. But how far does it matter? for
How
a
far
hive?
is the hive from the strawberries to
Yeah.
get good pollination?
Yes.
So if you're doing it specifically for pollination, you're not going to like this.
I know.
But the best way is to not have any hives there. Wait for those strawberries to start to bloom, then move the hive in. So that way, when they come out, right there's the strawberry blossom, and that's where they're gonna go. Whereas if that hive is sitting there, they're going, they're looking, they're hitting the sourwood, they're hitting the tulip poplar, they're hitting whatever's blooming when the strawberries are blooming, and then, oh, okay, there's strawberries, but they're already going to these other resources, so they often sort of miss some of those strawberries. So I used to pollinate apples, and there's the king blossom, which is the first one out. And when that king blossom hit, that's when I moved my hives into the apple orchards. I didn't move them in before the bloom. I moved them in slightly after that first bloom. So when they came out, they didn't have to look for anything. They went to the apples. So that's the best way. But that's kind of a bugger, right?
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right now they're
Yeah.
a good distance away, but
They're still
Yeah.
going to benefit you, absolutely. But if you want to maximize,
right.
get them out of there, wait for the strawberries to start blooming, then move them back in. So you can see as I've killed sufficient time, I'm really good at that. Thank you all for helping with your questions. You can see a lot more bees have come up, right? And so a lot more, if we sat here and asked more questions and answered more questions, even more will have come up. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to find some frames of brood, and I may, just for sake of this split, right? Obviously that's not enough adult bees. So I may end up having to shake some adult bees in here. But here's some great pollen for them. So I'll give them this one as well. So there's my 5 frames, and now what I can do is I'm going to cheat again. So this is not the good way to do this, but I'm going to take these and put them in here.
Oh, on the other side?
Oh, well, they're a
See,
good.
they're chasing it around.
Yeah, so that's a good example that.
That white one, I think.
So that's a little bit of wax moth webbing. The bees, that's not so bad. They'll clean that up. And what he just saw was an adult wax moth. So a good strong colony will defend itself against wax moth. Occasionally we'll hear, is that still, there we go. Should clean that rabbit out. Occasionally we'll hear customers say, oh, my colony was killed by wax moth. That's very rarely the case. What usually happens is the colony failed and wax moth took advantage of that colony. Same thing with hive beetle. Hive beetle doesn't kill colonies. It's a symptom of something else going on inside that colony. So now I want to get this back down below my queen excluder. So I'm going to take this, set it off. I'm going to take this, set it off, and now this is that box that had all my brand new comb. So I'm going to smoke it pretty heavily. That typically is sufficient to get any queen that may be in this box to dive down in. You can see them all running. Because I want to get this up above my my queen excluder. So I'm giving it a good smoke, trying to chase down the queen that may be in there. And I'm going to put this queen excluder underneath this box and that box on top. I use burlap because it's convenient, and I can, because it's on a roll, the stuff that we've got. So if I'm in the hive for 5 minutes, I'll pull off a piece this big. If I'm in the hive for an hour, I'll pull off a piece this big. So I can sort of, without wasting it. I am going to go ahead and put this back on now with this with brand new frames up above. And I'll just come back in a while, in a while being a week, to make sure I don't have any eggs up here, that my queen, that in fact I did smoke her down and she is below it. And now this one I'm done with. And the only thing left is to install the queen. Where's my queen? So at this point, thank you very much for being such a great babysitter.
Time for the coronation?
Yeah, so how many have ever installed packages? So at this point, it's basically like installing a package. We've got our bees in a box, and we've got our queen, and I have to introduce her just the way I would a package. So for those of you that have installed queens before, you know we have to pull the cork from which end?
Candy.
The candy end. And I want to, me personally, I like the candy end up, so that if one of the attendants in this cage happens to die, it'll fall away from the exit. Okay? Jennifer, I think, I don't know, but I think she would say put the candy end down. And the reason why she likes to put the candy end down is if it gets hot, that candy won't sort of drip down onto the queen. I've never ever had that happen, and I've installed a lot of queens, so I always go with the candy end up. That's a personal preference. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this queen and... You all right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Oh.
It just wanted my face.
I'm going to take the queen cage and just slip it in between the frames. When I come back, they will have built brace comb there, some wild comb. I'll have to cut that out. I'll re-space my frames and make sure that they're building properly. You can see now that she's in there that they are walking on the cage. They're starting to tend to her. I have that screen accessible, right, so that they can get on that screen, fan, spread her pheromone, etc. I don't want to smash that up against the surface of a frame so that they
Smell like
can't
a queen
get to
over
her.
there now.
Yeah.
I was wondering why they're all like
They'll
loving my
continue.
hair.
Yeah.
Like
Held the queen long enough.
I smell like a queen.
So I just always put it up. I have it on a slight angle. I usually just have it up so that at a glance I can look down in there and see, you know, if there's still bees in it or not. At this point, I can close it up, and now I'm just going to do this like I normally would. In, you know, a week or so time, I'm going to come back, make sure my queen is released. I'm going to come back a week or so after that to make sure that she's out and laying, and I'm going to continue to grow this if I want into a full-size hive. Or maybe I want to use this as a resource for all these other hives, so I'll constantly be taking frames of brood, I'll constantly be taking drawn comb, etc. to keep these other hives growing and keep this one small. It all depends on what your goal is for this nuke. But now we've essentially made this split.
So use it as a feeder hive, basically, for your other hives. Do you, let's say we're going to use it mainly to build up another hive. Do you do the same thing now? Let the nursery stay on it and go with it? Or do you take all the bees off and just...
So that's a really good question. Let's say that the queen was established in here, this thing's humming along, and I've got that hive down there that's a single story, and it's floundering a little bit. And I want to take some frames from here and move them down there. You want to shake the bees off, because these bees, the adult bees, will fight with the adult bees of that colony. But they don't care if you're giving them frames of brood. And when those bees from the capped cells emerge, all intents and purposes, they're part of that hive. They know nothing different.
And then replace this that you just took out with new.
And then, so yeah, so what you could do is maybe I'm not maybe that one's not faltering, but maybe I just want to use this to try and get rid of some of the older frames in that one. So I'll take a frame from here, move it over there, take that old ratty frame. Maybe I'm gonna scrape the wax off and reuse it. Maybe I'm gonna just throw it out. Maybe, who knows what I'm doing. But then I would put a fresh frame here and let them draw fresh, clean wax.
And what would cause them to reject that queen?
Poorly mated. Maybe I've really screwed up, and the queen is in there, and so they are queen right, and so that they don't need her. They don't want her.
Right.
So poorly mated, queen in there. Maybe she mated but doesn't have a good pheromone production. You know, maybe she was from an older larva.
She has good
I
pheromones.
made a split and just took 3 frames out of the deep and put it in a 10-frame box. And didn't have a queen crush. So about 2 weeks later, I went and bought a queen, put the queen in. 4 days later, she was released. Looked like everything was fine. 3 days after that, I checked, no queen.
Yeah.
3 more days after that, still no queen, no eggs, no eggs.
So, I'm getting the signal. So it could be just that she wasn't properly mated. It could be that there were some cups in there with eggs, some queen cells that maybe you missed,
Yep.
and that's
Well,
good
I
enough.
thought that I had one, but it just didn't seem to develop.
Yeah.
But I waited for a couple of weeks before I went. It's not working. I got to go
Yeah.
get a queen. I thought I had one, but
So I would probably go something happened with the rearing and mating of that queen that they just didn't like her.
so at this point, would you take another frame and put in there, or go buy a queen?
At this point, I would probably supplement with some frames of brood, and I would still try and get a queen in there. Otherwise, if you give them frames of brood, you're gonna end up with an emergency queen situation.
Like I said, do give them some.
Give them some brood, but get a queen in there.
Oh, okay, both.
Yeah.
Do both. Okay, do both.
If you give them the brood, will that make them think that they have a queen, or they'll be too worried about sending the brood?
If-
Try to.
If you give them brood, it's just you're only giving them brood to keep the population up. If you give them brood with no queen, they'll try and raise one out if there's some larvae there. There'll be an emergency. But the other thing is, depending on how long they've been without a queen, remember that laying worker situation, 3 weeks, right? You've got a 3-week window. The queen's dead today, then all this capped brood, all these eggs, it takes 21 days for all that to emerge out. Now you've lost brood pheromone. It's the queen pheromone and brood pheromone that suppress the workers and prevent them from laying. So by keeping that brood in there, worst case, they raise out an emergency queen, but that's better than having a laying worker. So,
Right, I'm gonna have to look for that because there's no brood now. It's gone.
okay.
It's all hatched out.
Well, a laying.
Sorry, because when you're buying a queen, what kind of expectations should you have? Should you recruit them later? How do you know whether you're getting one that's fully mated or not?
So the queens, the good breeders, they are putting them in mating nukes. She's going off on mating flights, and she should be in there for at least 21 days. That's sort of that's the rule of thumb. Because once she goes off on that mating flight, she comes back, she starts to lay. Usually takes a couple of days for her when she gets back from that mating flight, and that gives her a couple weeks to lay. But the reality is that, if she mates with one drone, which is not a good mating, she will have enough sperm to lay for 21 days. But then a week later, 2 weeks later, she could be a drone layer because she's exhausted that resource. So, I mean, they do the best they can, but at some point they gotta say, all right, she's good. I mean, what do you do? Do you sit on them for 4 months? And then, well, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's sort of an extreme, right? But it could happen. Maybe she gets out into the drone congregation area, and there's a big old thunderhead heading this way, and she mates with one drone, and she's back to the colony. And then there's a week of rain, and at that point, oh, I just pinched her, and she got me. And then a week of rain, and she's confined to the hive now. So that's it. So there's cases, yeah, one drone unlikely, but possible.
So a laying worker's
Laying worker's going to lay drones. Yep. They won't. Yeah, a lot of times they cannibalize them. They never mature.
Very well done.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.